Hello, everyone, and welcome to my Patreon page. Glad you're joining me on this new sort of adventure for me as well. I don't really do videos very much, but I thought this would be I've been interested in it and sort of thought this would be a good idea, something kind of fun to do and that we could all learn from, me, myself included, sort of experimenting and it would hopefully take me to new directions as well as clarify some things that some of you might be wondering about. I get asked a lot of stuff on the internet, on Facebook, Instagram, and it seems to be like there's a usual trend as to what people ask about. You know, a lot about gear, tone, practice exercises, and practice routines, composition. So I thought it would be a good idea to do this Patreon page, which is, every month I'm planning, maybe hopefully more than once a month, post a certain video or an exercise or both, talking about a bunch of stuff. So I thought I'd start with something that I think is super important and just getting down to it, which is tone. As a guitar player, I think tone is a very important part of our instrument, and very particular as well. Sometimes other players in jazz and other things are not so, they know how involved things get with the guitar a little bit. Not that other instruments don't. But when we're playing electric, which is most of our situations, unless you're playing a straight up acoustic group, which case the whole miking is a different trip. But if you're playing electric guitar, like most of us are, I guess, when we're playing live, you have to deal with, sort of your guitar, your strings, your pickups, pedals, wherever you choose to use, and amplifiers, which this whole thing is sort of integral to your sound. You can't really separate these things. Guitar and the amp are one thing, and the sound they make is sort of what gives you your comfort zone. Like, if you feel like you're not getting your sound, or you're uncomfortable with the sound that you're getting in a room, it can sort of make it harder to play. Which well, of course we all deal with what we have to deal with, but getting a good tone is important. And I thought I'd talk about some things that I've learned that's sort of been helping me with sound. So without further ado, I'm going to start by talking about my axe, actually, the guitar, which is, I guess, is the sort of a very common type of instrument in jazz. Seems to be the preferred kind of the two humbucker instrument, semi-hollow. It can be a hollow body like a 175. This is similar to a 335, but it seems that, like, in jazz, people have been favoring humbuckers as opposed to single coils, sort of had that fat, sort of chunky sound, and this is no exception. This is what this is. This particular guitar is a Westville. That's the brand. It's a Japanese-made guitar. This guy called Masaki Nishimura designs them. And we got to know each other, and eventually I became a Westville artist and got to have this really nice guitar. And I've owned 335s. D'Angelic, Japanese D'Angelic was not by the D'Angelic. I don't think that would be affordable for me. I don't think maybe I'll ever have one of those. But yeah, this is similar to a 335, or even if you play a Les Paul, that's kind of the pickup configuration you're dealing with. So this has a center block in the middle. It's carved top, carved back, and in a weird way, the block is part of the construction. It's part of the top, part of the sides. It's sort of all one thing. So I guess it could be a chambered guitar. I'm not sure how that goes. The different thing is that it has this stop tail piece here, and the strings come out around the back like a Telecaster, and yeah, it goes through it. I don't know if that does something for the sustain, but it is a very sort of strong sounding guitar. It rings out a lot, sustains a bunch. The neck is sort of an oval, sort of V shape, a little bit chunkier than the C, than what you're finding in a Gibson and all that, which I enjoy. The fretboard is an ebony fretboard. I'm not sure about the radius. Scale length is 24 3/4, kind of like a Gibson, and that's about it. Yeah. 2 humbuckers, and that's it. This specific guitar, I have changed the pickups of. It came with Kent Armstrongs, which are fine, but I found them a little bit harsh in some situations. So I moved to Fralins. These are Lindy Fralins, pure PAFs, both on the neck and the bridge. The other thing that's sort of important, segueing to that, is and maybe not a lot of people talk about, is string gauge. It's jazz players tend to favor heavier strings as they should. It gives you that sort of chunkier. Let me see. Sort of chunkier. That kind of chunkier, high. You get a big full body sound out of the guitar. But the problem with that is that I found is that as we go up in gauges, the whole thing goes up. So for instance, if you're using 13s, a 13 set from Diodario, all of a sudden your low E is going to be a super thick string. I'm going to find out the gauges and put it up here on an edit, and I believe it's a 58 or 52. So you end up with a really thick low string, and you're really dealing with a semi-hollow body and humbuckers. So what tends to happen is that they're looking to get a chunky sound, but they end up getting like a boomy sound, which is a real problem. When I started recording, I remember my good friend engineer Michael Perez-Cisneros, who's a great guitar recording guy, and just engineer in general, but he knows a lot about guitar sounds. He said that, man, like, have you noticed how like boomy the strings sound, the low? And I never had, because when you play live, you try to get that big sound, and you don't. A lot of times, some people do, but I hadn't noticed how that mixed with the whole group. So what I've been trying to do is actually have heavier top strings and lighter bottoms. I find that that's sort of like a good compromise. So what I've been doing is using a Diodario 11 set, actually, all the way through. And then I'll put a 12 gauge on the E string and a 16 on the B string. It's kind of a light 16, a light B string. Gets a little bendy, but I like it, and it sounds good. I go back and forth between a 12 and a 13 on the top. But right now I'm doing 12s. I feel like it helps legato a little bit. I've been trying to do that, like sort of work the right hand less a little bit and more the left hand, and I think that really helps. And yeah, that's about it for guitars. Friendly pickups, the strings, and I'm happy with sort of how the sound is on this guitar. Sometimes roll a little bit of tone out, I got a little bit of spring verb on the amp. I usually actually gonna take it off. Try to keep it a little bit, cleaner. So that's just kind of a scale to give you an idea of what I'm trying to get sound wise. And then let's talk a little bit about amps. I think that's a good next step, sorts. So amps, given if I could have my preference, I'm a fan of tube amps. A lot of people do transistors like polytones and all that. I think you can get a good sound out of pretty much any and every amp. The two I use are, I think, two very common ones, or at least their design is very popular. You find variations on the formula, but it's basically it. I used to own this really nice 65 Fender Twin. It was a vintage amp. It was beautiful. It was a twin reverb, but it was not. They're usually really bright, but it was actually a little bit darker. I don't know if it was the age or the particular way it was built or what had been done to it. But once you move to New York, you realize pretty quick that having a big, heavy amp doesn't really work unless you drive a car. And I do drive, but I don't own a car in New York. It doesn't really, you take public transport here everywhere, like subways, to gigs and everything. And that's the case for most musicians here. So I ended up, downsizing a little bit. So now what I've been using the most are these two guys here, which I'll show you in a second. This is the Tyler JT14. It's based on a Princeton, like a black-face Princeton from the 60s. I believe it's 14 watts, not super loud. It has, volume knob, treble, bass, verb, and tremolo. They're useful like verb, especially. You know, sometimes if you gotta have one amp on the gig, you're not bringing pedals or anything. It's good to have a little bit of verb. In the back, it actually has a mid control, which Princeton's didn't have, and it has a 12-inch speaker, which I guess original Blackface Princeton's had 10-inch speakers, but this is a little bit bigger. It has a little bit more, you know, low end. And then this guy over here is based on a Tweed Deluxe from the 50s, actually. These the Tweed amps. It's a little bit different. It's 20 watts, so it's quite a bit louder. It's very loud, in fact. And I'll show you a little bit of the sounds of both amps. It has sort of a tighter low end. I've been favoring this amp a little bit more. I kind of really like it now. It has a lot of mid range, sort of a tighter bottom, like a little bit, you know, less flubby is the word that John from Tyler used. Less flubby low end. And the highs are a little more sparkly, and I agree with him. That's kind of the thing. And the interesting, it has two inputs, bright and normal. A couple of volume, the volume controls are for each of the inputs, and then you got the tone knob. So it doesn't really have a 3-band EQ or anything. It's got just a tone knob, and it makes it, you know, you got a bit of a low pass filter and that kind of thing, and it basically makes it brighter or darker. Yeah. So these are my two amps. The Tyler 2020 is what it's called, based on a Tweed Deluxe, and the Tyler JT14, based on a Princeton reverb. Both tube amps, and excellent. I like them both a lot. So that's kind of the basic setup. You know, you got the guitar. In this case, two humbuckers. If I had something like a Les Paul 335 or a 175, that sort of would work in the same fashion as this guitar. And then it goes into a couple of tube amps. You know, they don't have to be the same as these guys. A Blues Junior would be something like that, or a deluxe, a Blackface Deluxe reissue, or you know, all kinds of things would stand for these guys as options. But that's just what I happen to use. I try to actually, as far as sounds go, I like to get like a nice, big, clean sound, you know. Without it getting too muddy, and I think that works both for you know, more modern styles of jazz and even kind of more old-fashioned things. You know what I mean? Maybe if we're playing a little bit, you know, more rhythm guitar, I might turn down my volume a tiny bit. I feel like It's funny saying wood, but I think it brings out sort of the more wooden element of the guitar. Maybe just having less output from the pickups makes it more, you know, a little bit more. Kind of addicted to this voicing right now. I don't know why, but yeah, turning down the volume a little bit sometimes rounds it off a tiny bit, whereas the whole way through, you know, it's like, it's very strong, very present. I remember Tim Miller's teacher I had back at Berkeley. He used to always take the volume down a little bit, never play with the volume all the way open. He thought the pickup sounded just a little bit sweeter like that, and I kind of like it too. Anyhow, yeah. So this is a little bit of the Tyler amp, the Princeton one, the Blackface sort of vibe. I have my treble kind of 9 o'clock. If you're thinking about the knob like a watch. I actually got no bass. The bass is completely off. I find that sometimes these amps tend to have a lot of low end. This guitar is pretty dark. don't think there's any shortage of low end. You know, I mean, you got a pretty chunky sound as it is, and yeah, that's kind of what it's how I have it set up right now. I am cranking the mids a little bit. I believe I'm at about probably like 2 o'clock. I'm probably close to 3 on the mid knob. Feel like it gives me a little bit mid range, sort of that nice, guitar cuts through a little bit better somehow. Just a nice kind of thick sound, cuts through, and not overly boomy on the low end. Sort of what I'm going for here, especially with the humbuckers. You know what I mean? Anyway, now I'm going to talk a little bit about Tyler 2020, the deluxe tweed kind of amp. Get different sounds, see where how it goes. So, I just switched over amps. Now I'm playing through the 2020, the deluxe kind of model amp. And if we're talking about black faces versus tweed amps, you can definitely hear this one definitely more high end, a little sparklier up there. What I really like about it is that even playing humbuckers, there's a little more definition to the notes, which I've been really into. The low end is also a little tighter. It's a loud amp. It's like big speaker and all that, but still no boominess. The mid range is really beautiful. I really love the mid range of it. And even though it doesn't really have an EQ control, like it's basically the tone right now is right in the middle. So kind of it would be like a flat EQ, I guess, on this. The tone knob is in the middle. You can make it. I mean, the bright input, by the way, but you can make it a little bit brighter if you want. Yes, really bright, or a little bit darker if you like. Which actually sounds pretty nice. Yeah, kind of a little bit darker there. But I like to have it, in terms of sound, I really think that where it's at is sort of having, a nice chunky sound through all the strings, not piercing in the high in high up the neck. All this sounds really even. Especially when you get here, you don't have a lot of boominess, muddiness. If I were to play, even if I play a really low voicing, this is sort of a C major 7 over G. It still feels pretty balanced, very clear. Here it gets particularly nice. So, even when I'm trying to get like a sort of a jazz sound, I go for this sort of fat, but somewhat dark, but not overly muddy, and those kinds of things. So some I guess some tonal tips I like to give people is, if you take anything away from this, would be, pick up height on your humbucker. I tend to go a little bit lower on the bass side of things, so that I get nice definition and no muddiness, none of that. Maybe a little bit higher on the a little bit higher on the higher strings, a little bit higher on on the first strings and on the bright strings, and also tend to notice that, like, when you pick, maybe you're starting here, so you go a little harder on these guys. So it's good to have that compensate. Maybe have this side of the pickup a little bit lower, so that when you hit it, it doesn't pop so much. And maybe if you're getting down here, once you're in the swing of things, a lot of times players lose a bit of steam, kind of going up, just having them a little bit higher up here might help compensate for if you're peaking a little bit lighter once you're on the move and things like that. So I'd say if you working with an amp like a tube amp, like something like a Blues Junior or a Twin Reverb, or just any sort of amp that has like mid, lows, and highs on the EQ, I always try to tone down, depending on how bright the amp is, I'll take the treble down a good amount, and then the bass, sort of tailor it to the lower strings. You know what I mean? Make sure it's not getting boomy or anything like that. A lot of times I end up having my treble at 9 o'clock. The bass, depending on the size of the speakers, but usually is around 11, and then my mid-range is usually cranked up pretty high, because I feel like that's where a lot of the guitar's voice sort of lies. So I'm usually at night, like 9 o'clock, or sometimes even more, depending on the amp. You know what I mean? Of course, there's also times that you're gonna face really bright amps. When that happens, don't hesitate to turn that treble knob all the way off. I have done that multiple times. I remember one time there was this Twin, and it was just so bright. I remember taking the treble knob all the way off, and then I have this EQ pedal, which we'll talk about EQ pedals really soon. And I remember using that to take some more treble out, because the thing was just so piercing, and it wasn't helpful. And hey, I guess regarding guitars and amps, that's kind of what I have to talk about now. I'm planning on talking. I've been playing Telecasters a lot recently, and I've grown to really like them, even for jazz. But this is sort of my main axe, and I feel like that's what a lot of people that play jazz have, like the humbucker, semi-hollow guitar, or fully hollow. And I hope this has been helpful to get you some pointers as to if there's something in your sound that's bothering you, or like if you don't know sort of where to begin, if you're just getting into this, you know what I mean. And when I first started playing, like, I couldn't really get a grasp as to how to get a jazz sound, a good jazz sound, and not a lot of people could help me specifically in these things, like tell me that sort of EQing and what to go for. So I guess that's what I'm trying to get to with this video, is sort of talk about what to aim for when you try to get your tone on a jazz guitar, and certainly what I aim for, more than specific EQs and something like that, but also a little bit of that. Anyway, I hope this has been helpful. It was a whole lot of talking, not so much playing, but we'll get into that too. Hope to be doing a video on pedals really soon. That's a big part of what's now the jazz sort of sound. The first kind of thing we tend to notice, I'll even turn it on for a minute, is reverb. Amps have like spring verb, but this is with pedals you get all different kinds of verbs, and you can set the parameters a little bit different. If you want some pre-decay, meaning having some time pre-delay, meaning having some time between the attack and when the verb sort of kicks in. You could have that be even longer. I don't want to get too deep into it, but those kinds of things, simulate different rooms. You can get hall reverb, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I guess that's sort of where I'm going with. The next one might be on reverb and how I use it. Anyhow, I hope this has been helpful. If please send me your suggestions, comments. I'm kind of learning my way through this, and hopefully you're enjoying it. Feel free to send me messages through the Patreon. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And yeah, thank you so much once again. And I look forward to the next video and to hearing from you guys. Thank you.